Many humans do not want awakening. They want reassurance. They want to feel chosen, protected, special, spiritually advanced. They want spirituality to tell them that their suffering has a hidden cosmic meaning and that they are somehow closer to the truth than everyone else. And spirituality can provide that very easily. In fact, spirituality can become one of the most sophisticated forms of self-deception because it wears the language of light while fitting the architecture of the ego. You can meditate every day and still be manipulative. You can talk about consciousness and still be deeply unconscious. You can speak of love while operating entirely from control, fear, and unresolved wounds. Words are cheap. Spiritual aesthetics are cheap. Performative enlightenment is cheap. Truth is not. And that is where no bullshit spirituality begins. It begins the moment you stop asking, how do I feel more spiritual? And start asking, what is actually true here, even if it destroys the version of myself I was most attached to? No bullshit spirituality is a refusal to use spirituality as another form of self-deception. No bullshit spirituality means caring more about truth than emotional intoxication. No bullshit spirituality understands that truth does not always feel good. Sometimes truth humiliates you. Sometimes it is inconvenient. Sometimes it destroys your favorite beliefs. Sometimes it removes the emotional story you were building around everything in your life. Sometimes it dismantles the version of yourself you are most proud of. And if your spirituality cannot survive honesty, it was never conscious, integrated, mature, and honest spirituality. It was self-deception with just better branding. So, in this video, we are going to talk about spirituality without performance, without ego theater, without fantasy, without comforting lies, just truth. Okay, so to me, no bullshit spirituality is spirituality stripped of performance, fantasy, ego theater, and comforting lies. A lot of people enter spirituality looking for relief, and there's no problem with that. This is really normal. They come for peace, looking for meaning, for healing, for answers. That part is natural. But somewhere along the way, many people unconsciously turn spirituality into another identity structure, another mask, another ego architecture. Instead of awakening, it becomes decoration. Instead of truth, it becomes emotional anesthesia. No bullshit spirituality rejects that. No bullshit spirituality is what remains when spirituality stops being a costume and becomes self-confrontation. No more distractions, no more escape, and no more running. No bullshit spirituality pays attention to behavior, not branding. It watches. How do you treat people when no one is watching? How do you respond when your ego is threatened? Can you apologize? Can you sit with uncertainty? Can you tolerate truth that wounds your self-image? That is spiritual work, not just altered states. integrity. Not just intuition, discernment. Not just energy, responsibility. No bullshit spirituality also dismantles a very subtle addiction, the addiction to feeling spiritually significant. But what is so unbearable about insignificance? What is the problem with being a supporting character instead of the main character for once? Why can't some people sit quietly with smallness? What is so wrong with being small? What is the problem with not being seen? There is a quiet pleasure in believing you are receiving messages, or awakening faster, or seeing deeper than others. It gives identity, a spiritual glow. But often, it's just ego learning a new language. No bullshit spirituality notices that too. Not with judgment, but with precision. Real spirituality often looks less glamorous than people expect. It can look like therapy, discipline, boundaries, grief, silence, accountability, living unhealthy relationships, admitting you were wrong, learning emotional regulation, saying no, starting over. Sometimes enlightenment looks like paying your bills, telling the truth, and ending the pattern. No bullshit spirituality also understands that intuition is not the same as instinct, and neither is the same as psychic perception. People confuse emotional intensity with divine guidance. Not every strong feeling is intuition. Not every synchronicity is cosmic confirmation. Not every spiritual experience is wisdom. Discernment is sacred. No bullshit spirituality also breaks the obsession with higher perspectives. Because a higher perspective that ignores reality is not higher, it's just abstraction. Real elevation does not disconnect you from the concrete. It makes you more precise inside it, more responsible, more present, less self-deceived. Sometimes awakening feels like peace. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like your entire inner architecture is collapsing. Because growth often feels like death before it can feel like freedom. In no bullshit spirituality, truth matters more than comfort. If your spirituality only survives when it feels good, it is probably not spirituality. It is dependency. No bullshit spirituality is not cynical. It is not anti-magic. It is not anti-mystery. It simply refuses to worship illusion. It respects mystery without surrendering intelligence. It allows wonder without abandoning discernment. It understands that consciousness is sacred, but so is clarity. In the end, spirituality should make you more real, not less. More honest, more grounded, more sovereign, more capable of love without self-deception. Otherwise, it is just ego wearing incense. The deeper problem is that many people do not want liberation. They want reassurance. They want spirituality to confirm that they are special, chosen, protected, misunderstood geniuses of the cosmos. They want a narrative that preserves the ego while sounding transcendent. And spirituality can provide that very easily. It can tell people, you are here for a higher mission. You're more awakened than others. Your suffering proves your spiritual superiority. Your isolation means you are chosen. Your failures are actually evidence of your higher destiny. Sometimes that is partially true, but sometimes it is just narcissism with celestial vocabulary. This is where discernment becomes brutal, because some truths are flattering, and flattering truths are dangerous. A lie wrapped in spiritual language is still a lie. And one of the hardest things for a sincere person is realizing that not everyone speaking about light is operating from light. Some are operating from hunger, some from wounds, some from control, and some from unresolved trauma dressed as divine mission. Not all spiritual teachers are malicious. Many are simply unintegrated. They believe their own projections. They confuse emotional certainty with revelation. They mistake personal symbolism for universal truth. And followers do the same. People often do not follow truth. They follow emotional resonance. If it feels profound, then it must be true. No. Sometimes it just touches a wound. Intensity is not accuracy. Being emotionally moved by something does not automatically make it spiritually valid. Sometimes it means it has triggered a pattern, a longing, a childhood need, or a hunger for belonging, each of which can distort your perception. Those currents can color your view, quietly shaping what you see and how you interpret it. This is why shadow work matters. Without self-awareness, spirituality becomes a projection machine. You do not see reality. You see your unmet needs reflected back at you, and you call it divine guidance. You call attachment a soul connection. You call obsession intuition. You call fear a warning from the universe. You call avoidance peace. And if no one challenges you, you can build an entire spiritual identity around your own unexamined distortions. And that is dangerous, especially because spiritual communities often reward certainty, not clarity. People trust confidence. They trust charisma. They trust symbolic language and emotional conviction. But truth is often quieter. Truth sometimes says, I don't know. Truth sometimes says, I was wrong. Truth sometimes says, this belief made me feel powerful, but it was not real. That kind of humility is rare because it costs identity. And identity is what most people are protecting, if you think about it. No bullshit spirituality is willing to lose identity. It is willing to let cherished beliefs die. It is willing to ask, did I believe this because it was true or because it made me feel significant? That question alone can dismantle entire inner worlds. And sometimes it should, because awakening is not always ascending. Sometimes it is disillusionment. And disillusionment is sacred. People treat disillusionment like failure, but often it is the first honest moment. The illusion had to die so perception could begin. Losing fantasy is not losing spirituality. It is meeting it for the first time. There's also a loneliness in this path. When you stop performing belief and start pursuing truth, some people become uncomfortable. They prefer your role in their mythology. They liked you more when you repeated the script. Truth isolates before it connects, because clarity is disruptive, especially in communities built on mutual reinforcement of illusion. When you stop nodding politely at nonsense, people call you negative, harsh, close-minded, unspiritual. But sometimes refusing delusion is the most spiritual thing you can ever do in your life. Love without discernment becomes self-destruction. Compassion without boundaries becomes permission. Openness without structure becomes possession. Wisdom requires form. Even consciousness needs a spine. And perhaps that is the simplest definition. No bullshit spirituality is love with discernment, mysticism with intelligence, compassion with boundaries, faith without surrendering perception. It is not about becoming untouchable. Unfortunately, on a planet like planet Earth, no bullshit spirituality is about becoming undeceivable. No bullshit spirituality asks, are you becoming more conscious or just more attached to a prettier illusion? Because spirituality can be one of the easiest places to hide. People hide behind divine timing to avoid action, high vibration to avoid grief, so contracts to justify abuse, manifestation to deny reality. I am an empath to avoid boundaries. I am awakened to avoid humility. And the no bullshit spirituality usually looks like this. 1. Reality over escapism. Not using spirituality to avoid pain, responsibility, shadow work, or psychological maturity. No, everything happens for a reason, so I never have to confront anything. No, none of that. More like, what is actually true here, even if it's uncomfortable? 2. Discernment over blind belief. Not believing something just because it sounds mystical or beautiful or empowering. Questioning gurus, channelers, spiritual authorities, downloads, your own projections. Truth is not measured by how magical it sounds. 3. Ego awareness. Understanding that spirituality can become narcissism wearing white clothes. Examples: superiority complexes disguised as high vibration, savior complexes, spiritual bypassing, I am more evolved than others. Real spirituality usually makes people humbler, not grander. 4. Embodiment over aesthetics. Not confusing crystals, aesthetics, vocabulary, or rituals with consciousness. You can talk about consciousness all day and still be deeply unconscious. Character matters more than performance. 5. Integrity over image. Being willing to lose approval for truth. Not building a spiritual identity to be admired. Not using light and love to manipulate or avoid honesty. Sometimes truth is gentle. Sometimes truth cuts. Both matter both exist at the same time, and wisdom is knowing which one reality is asking for. Spirituality begins where self-deception ends. You are not here to feel spiritually advanced. You are here to become unmistakably, undeniably you. So real that your presence alone awakens something in others and reminds them what it means to be alive, to truly exist. You're not here to be admired for your spirituality. You are here to become real enough that your presence cannot lie. The goal was never to feel special. The goal is to become free.